Hi again, I'm John Nielsen with Wing Chun Hall, here to discuss Wing Chun, your best self-defense option. And today we are doing the 12 days of Wing Chun Christmas, and we're on day 10. And since Wing Chun doesn't break naturally down into sets of 10, or 11 for that matter, it does break down into sets of 12, but I'm going to continue this list. So I'm doing a top 10, and then a top 11, and a top 12. So today we're doing the top 10 must-see movies with a fighting theme. Okay. Now, so what I am not doing here is talking about TV series, and I'm not doing a top 10 martial artists. I'm just talking about movies. And the ones that I picked are ones that I feel have influenced the way that martial arts are seen and depicted in Hollywood and other movie making centers. Okay, so my number 10 is G-Men from James Cagney in 1935. And I don't know who the stunt coordinator was on that because nobody was listed, and a lot of times they didn't have someone who was specifically designated to do that kind of thing. And so it's very likely that James Cagney coordinated his own stunts. And this is one of the reasons that I think that it deserves an entry into this list, because James Cagney was one of the first actors who actually went to a serious martial arts school and learned something. He learned judo for this, and then he implemented that into his acting. Okay. Now, moving on, we're going to jump several decades to 1988, and we're going to use Die Hard with Bruce Willis. Now, I don't know who the stunt coordinator was or the fight coordinator for this, because this was back when this kind of thing wasn't really listed. So if you know, then please go ahead and put it in the comments. But one of the things that I liked about this was there was this period of the 60s and 70s where fighting got to be unrealistic. Now, even though there were many epic movies, especially martial arts movies during that period, I felt like they were doing a disservice. So this is one of the reasons that Bruce Lee isn't on this list. The reason that he's not on the list is because I feel that he did as much bad for the martial arts scene as he did good. Obviously, he did lots of good for it, but there are a lot of misconceptions and the direction that the martial arts movies went that were a result of what Bruce Lee was doing. I thought they were going in the wrong direction, so I didn't put him on. But when Die Hard came back, things started to get more, well, they were going in a direction that I feel is better. One of the things that I liked about it was the way that the fight scenes were brutal and messy, and the protagonist didn't immediately recover from his wounds, even though, and he just kept on going regardless of the fact that he was having trouble. Then we're going to move to 1992 with The Last of the Mohicans. Daniel Day-Lewis starred in that, and the stunt coordinator was Mickey Gilbert. I think he did a really good job. And one of the things that changed in this movie that I hadn't really seen or noticed so much in other movies before was the way that they went between individual fights and group fights. So there were fights on the battlefield, and then there were also fights individually. And the one that really sticks out in my mind is the one where Hawkeye is moving. He comes to a battlefield and the battle's going on. He's trying to get through it, and so he moves. And as he moves, he is opposed by one person or another, and he has to just deal with it really quickly and keep moving, and deal with it really quickly and keep moving. And I haven't really seen many fights go that way. I mean, most of them show people coming together and clashing and then standing in one place or another, and they're just fighting for a long time. So this was interesting to show somebody just moving through it, which I think, again, is a very important consideration for a Wing Chun fighter who's working on self-defense. Then the next movie that we would move to is 1995, Braveheart, Mel Gibson. And Bill Little was the fight choreographer and stunt coordinator for that movie, too. And he did the same kind of thing that was done in The Last of the Mohicans, but what he did that I thought was really different Well, what I thought was really different was the fact that he had lots of different fights going on at the same time, and all of them were well choreographed. That kind of thing wasn't done so much before. So in my Wing Chun Origins Part 2 video, I took a clip from a Chinese movie where they were showing the fight during the Red Turban Rebellion, and I clipped like from the beginning of the fight, and then I let it run until the end of the discussion that I was having at the time. Except for there was a small part of it that I clipped so that I could continue talking about the topic. But in that clip, they showed the same stunt guy doing the same stunt over and over in different locations. It might have been a different stunt person, but it just kept happening, the same thing. And that was typical a lot of times when it wasn't really important that this person wasn't the protagonist. So they would just have people just doing things off in the background. But in Braveheart, they had lots of fights choreographed, and I thought that they did a really good job of that. They also did the same kind of thing that they did in The Last of the Mohicans, where there were some individual fights too. Like they also showed that kind of thing where Mel Gibson, as his William Wallace character, comes into the village and he has to fight one person after another as he's trying to move up to finally get to the guy that murdered his wife. Which again I thought was really interesting, so I like that. Then the next movie, 1997's Grosse Pointe Blank. Now, I like this movie because it has the kind of comedy that I think still pays respect to the fighting. So you have Jackie Chan's movies, which I like. Okay, so don't get me wrong about this. And if this was a top 10 actors, Jackie Chan would be on that list. And maybe there are some Jackie Chan movies that deserve to be on this list too. So again, you can mention that if you want to in the comments. I might have skipped something, but a lot of what Jackie Chan is doing is harking back to Harold Lloyd and Charlie Chaplin and those old silent movies, and he's doing it very well. But he wasn't the first person to do that kind of thing. So that kind of humor that he gets in there is not that innovative, so to speak. Okay, so on the other hand, you have this Grosse Pointe Blank with John Cusack and Danny Aykroyd, and of course there were other people who were involved in it. But the humor comes from this conflict that's going on between these two assassins. So Dan Aykroyd's character is trying to get John Cusack's character to join a union of assassins, and Cusack doesn't want to do it, and so there's conflict, and Dan Aykroyd's trying to kill him. And they just have these funny fights along the way. But the nice thing that they do is they move from armed to barehanded fighting, and then back to armed, and then they start innovating with different weapons that they just find in the area, which again is really well done, and I like that. So then if we're going to continue on that same line, we go to The Bourne Identity, which was in 2002. Jeff Imada was the one who choreographed that one, and Jeff Imada has done some wonderful fight scenes. He's very well sought after these days in Hollywood because of the good job that he does. Now, Jeff Imada is a student of Dan Inosanto, who was a student of Bruce Lee. And you can see the Wing Chun influence in his fight scenes, even though his main focus is Arnis and Filipino martial arts. So one of the things that I liked about the Bourne series was that they showed how there are some occasions where you have to fight with somebody but you don't want to hurt them. And that was shown pretty well kind of at the very beginning of the movie, where he's on a park bench and and there are a couple of policemen who come up to him. Of course, he doesn't want to hurt the policeman, and I'm not advocating any fight with a policeman under any circumstances, but he couldn't get caught, and so he fought with these guys, and he didn't want to hurt him, so he didn't really hurt him at all. But then there are other scenes in the movie where he had to fight with people and had to kill them. So it was good to show the distinction between those two different approaches to fighting. And they also had some real innovative moments when, like for instance, he was in a house and he gets caught by another spy who tries to kill him, and that spy is armed, and he's not armed, so the other guy has a knife, and he has to pick up a magazine and use that. to defend himself with. And I thought that was very, very innovative. I like that fight scene too. And then we moved to, speaking of the same kind of lines, we moved to 2006's Casino Royale. Of course, a James Bond movie has to be in this one, and I like Casino Royale, I think, the best in terms of the fight scenes. So Sean Connery did a good job of the fight scenes too for his era, and there was a movie that he was in called You Only Live Twice, where he also learned some real martial arts, and he implemented that into his fighting in the movies. But again, since Cagney did that first, I didn't want to include that in here. And then after Connery, there was Roger Moore, and Roger Moore was really doing a parody of what Sean Connery had done, so I didn't want to include that. And then you had Timothy Dalton, who was only Bond for a couple of movies, who was again good. I like Timothy Dalton. He was good as Bond, but he didn't last. And then there was Pierce Brosnan, who also was good, but I think that his fight scene suffered because there was this. He came into Bond at the same time that there was this real unrealistic push to ground fighting, and there was too much of that made it unrealistic. And then you had Daniel Craig, who got into it, and it went back to realism again. You can see that he doesn't want to be on the ground for very long, even though he sometimes is, which again is more like what you would probably be having to deal with if you were a spy. I particularly liked the first fight scene of that show, where they were in the bathroom and they were breaking sinks and toilets, and water was all over the place, and they were slipping. They were trying to stay on their feet, and it was very, very messy, and again, much far removed from what you might see in the ring in a sport combat. So I like that. Then moving to 2008, Taken. Oliver Schneider was the stunt coordinator for that. Did I get that right? Yep. And he is also very much like Jeff Imada, mostly Filipino influenced. And as I showed in Wing Chun Origins Part 2, there's a good chance that Wing Chun was also influenced by Filipino martial arts. The fight scenes in Taken are again a good example of how you will move from like armed to unarmed, or to using your hands and feet as arms, and then moving it back to weapons. I think that's kind of important because there are a lot of people who, when you tell them they should get involved in self-defense, they'll say, well, why don't I just get a gun? And this kind of movie shows how there are situations where you can't use a gun, or where you had a gun but you couldn't get to it, or you got to it but it ran out of ammo, or something like that, and you still had to fight. So that's a serious consideration that I think people who are involved in any kind of martial arts should consider. And it's a good showcase for something like Wing Chun that approaches all of those different fighting techniques. And then finally, well, not finally, sorry, number 2, where Sherlock Holmes in 2009, Robert Downey Jr. So since we were kind of moving in the Wing Chun direction, we'll do a Robert Downey Jr. Kind of a Wing Chun fight with Sherlock Holmes. His fight choreography was through Richard Ryan, and what I liked about this show was that it did a good job of showing how Wing Chun is very much like 19th century boxing, and even though there were certain parts of that movie that I didn't really think that should go along with Wing Chun, like he could predict what was going to happen from the other guy. He said, "I do this, and then he'll do this, and then I'll do this, and he'll do that, and then this is the this is how it's going to end up." Yeah, you can't do that. But the fight scenes were still well done. Okay, so finally, my number 1, Ip Man. Donnie Yen, choreographed by Sammo Hung. Yeah, this is a Wing Chun movie. I think that this may be the best Chinese martial art movie ever made. Maybe the best martial art movie ever made. One of the main reasons why it's a good martial art movie is because it gives good justification for the violence. Violence is rarely justified, but Every now and again, it is. Now, and I can't say that every time that he uses violence in the movie that it's justified, but there are lots of times when in that movie where it is, and then in the following movies, it's not so well justified. In Ip Man 3, it's a little bit better, but in Ip Man 2, not very well justified. And then there are other movies in that series that were perhaps not associated directly with the same producers. But Sammo Hung was in Ip Man, The Legend Begins, even for a brief time, and he also did choreograph it. But I didn't like that one as much because there was way too much wire work. And if you're one of these people who likes wire work, then maybe you like the movie, and that's fine, because what they're trying to do in that is like with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, how they will take a movie and try to make it like the opera. So they're trying to create beauty in it, and it's sort of a dance through the fight. But if you have been paying attention so far, you'll realize that I don't really like that kind of approach. So if you do that, that's great, and maybe you love the movie, and if you do and you want to tell me why that's, useful to the martial arts, then go ahead and put it in the comments down below. But personally, I like the realism, and so I didn't like that wire work stuff, and that's another reason why I didn't like the Grandmaster. That was one of the reasons. The other reason I didn't like it was because of the unrealistic fight scenes and the diversions from history. I thought they took far too much liberty with what really happened. So if we wanted to go in that direction, then the final fight is a better Ip Man movie, a better depiction. It does a better job of discussing the actual history. Yeah, I don't know why you have to take that much liberty, like for instance in the Grandmaster, with somebody's life, when his actual life is actually very interesting. So I didn't. That's another one I wouldn't recommend. So if you're looking at the Ip Man series, number 1's good, number 3 is good, number 2 is okay. The Legend Begins, not so much. The Grandmaster, no. Final Fight, okay. So that's it. So that's my list. Top 10 martial arts movies that every Wing Chun person should see. What did you think of my list? If you like it, go ahead and thumbs up. If you didn't like it, well, then what would you have put into the list? Okay, so please like, subscribe, and follow me on Patreon.